Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into UFO sightings, but with a twist.
The twist, huh?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at these sightings through the lens of folklore, using some excerpts from Soucoupes volantes et folklore by Bertrand Meheust.
Oh, that sounds fascinating.
It is. The basic premise is that UFO encounters often mirror these patterns we see in folklore and mythology. Those age-old stories.
Right, right. Makes you think, why do these modern encounters have so much in common with those ancient beliefs? What connects them?
Exactly. And that's what we're exploring. It's not just about little green men anymore.
I'm all ears.
Okay, well, Mahoy starts with a case from 1954, Marius de Wilde in France. He claimed this UFO landed right near his house.
A UFO landing classic.
Yeah, but it's the details. De Wilde and his son were outside when this strange craft, like an oblong shape on 6 legs, touched down. It was humming. Then 5 small figures came out. The one de Wilde thought was the leader. Well, he did something odd.
Odd how?
He went straight to de Wilde's son and started tapping the kid on the head. Then, get this, he picks up a chicken that was just there, and instead of the chicken freaking out, it just, calmed down.
Okay, tapping a kid's head, a strangely chill chicken. That does sound like something out of a fairy tale.
Right, and that's what Meheust is getting at. These details that seem so bizarre, they actually reflect rituals and beliefs about supernatural encounters in folklore. Like, think about the devil. He's often shown with children in these old stories. And offerings of chickens to appease spirits, that's in tons of traditions.
So is he saying UFO sightings are just modern versions of those stories, like our fears, but with a sci-fi twist?
Not exactly one-to-one, but he does point out how both UFO sightings and folklore, they're very theatrical.
Theatrical.
Yeah, by that I mean the use of symbols in specific settings. Almost like a performance to create that sense of awe and mystery.
Makes sense. Both are definitely playing with the uncanny, that mix of familiar and unsettling.
Exactly. But what about physical evidence? Burn marks, indentations, all that stuff. Meheust talks about that too.
Right, those physical traces. That's interesting because it brings up another parallel. Think about those stories of scorched earth where the devil walked, or fairy rings. Those physical traces in UFO sightings, they're like echoes of those markings left by supernatural beings in folklore.
It's kind of like the same script, different actors, and this is where Ted Phillips comes in, right?
Ted Phillips, yeah. The guy Meheust mentions, the researcher obsessed with UFO trace evidence.
He's convinced that UFOs are physical objects, but he totally dismisses ghosts and goblins. Seems like he just swapped one set of beliefs for another.
Yeah, even scientists operate within a belief system, just one that favors a scientific explanation over the supernatural.
So it's all about how we interpret the unknown, how our existing frameworks shape our views.
Exactly. We can't escape our cultural narrative.
This next part always creeps me out, though. The illnesses some witnesses report after their supposed close encounters.
Oh yeah, the physical effects.
Meheust talks about Antonio Villas-Boas, the guy who experienced nausea, fatigue, and even developed skin lesions.
And those 3 women in Kentucky, remember? Red marks and eye inflammation.
It's like the body's trying to tell a story it doesn't have the words for.
That's a really poetic way to put it. And it connects back to folklore, too. Think about those stories where encounters with the supernatural leave marks or afflictions.
Right, like a fairy's touch or a demon's brush.
Yeah,
The body becomes a canvas for these encounters, both in folklore and in UFO reports.
exactly. It's where the seen and unseen collide.
So is Meheust saying these reactions are psychosomatic then? Our minds manifesting these symptoms?
He doesn't really give a definite answer. He just poses the question. Is it a profound psychological experience, or is something more inexplicable at play?
Man, this is so much more complicated than spaceships and aliens. It's like a whole other layer of meaning I never considered.
That's the beauty of it, right? We're going beyond the realm of science fiction into the heart of what it means to be human.
And what about those gifts UFO occupants sometimes leave behind? I mean, gifts are cool, but these are usually so mundane.
Mundane, or they just vanish later. Like Joe Simonton, he got biscuits from UFO occupants, but the lab test said they were just normal Earth
A
biscuits.
cosmic prank.
Right. And again, we see this in folklore, too. Gifts from fairies or the devil, they often turn out to be worthless or disappear. It's a common theme.
But why give a meaningless gift? What's the point?
Well, I think it's about power. Who has the power to give, to demand, to disrupt our expectations? It's like a reminder that we're not in control.
It's not the gift itself, but the act of giving, the power dynamic. That's interesting.
It adds a whole other layer to understanding both folklore and UFO encounters. Are they playing with us,
No.
communicating something.
Disrupting our reality, maybe.
Exactly. It's like they're dropping clues, but to a puzzle we might never solve, which is kind of terrifying, but also so intriguing.
Totally. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, but stick around. There's a lot more to unpack.
It's kind of like, those optical illusions where your brain flips between two images?
Yeah, I get you mean.
Our perception, it's so easily influenced, especially with stuff outside our normal experience.
And that leads to Soucoupization.
Soucoupization.
Yeah, that's what Meheust calls it. It's how we reinterpret normal events, but through that UFO lens, like seeing UFOs everywhere. He uses the example of Z, this Italian night watchman.
What happened to him?
He was convinced he'd been abducted, said he fell, was all disoriented, blamed it on a UFO encounter.
Mm-hmm.
But when they looked into it, turns out he just tripped and fell in a ditch.
So no alien spaceship, just a clumsy guy in a ditch.
Yep, exactly. But it's interesting, right? During that whole UFO craze, with all those stories floating around, his mind just filled in the blanks, created a narrative that fit the mythology.
Makes you wonder how many other sightings are just misinterpretations.
Right, and this is where psychology comes in, like confirmation bias, where we favor information that supports what we already believe.
And social influence, too. If
Yeah.
everyone's talking UFOs, you're more likely to see them, even if it's just something ordinary.
It's not just what we see, but how our minds process it. Beliefs, social context, all that shapes our perception.
Absolutely. And that ties back to us being storytellers. We look for patterns, make sense of the world, even if we have to stretch reality a bit.
Hardwired to find meaning, even in random events.
Speaking of meaning, let's talk about those messages from supposed UFO occupants. Meheust says they're hardly ever straightforward. They're cryptic, ambiguous, sometimes even ironic.
It's true. Like Betty Hill, when she was shown a star map and asked to point out Earth, when she couldn't, they said, basically, if you don't know where you are, we can't explain where we're from.
That's so frustrating.
Right. You don't want to
It's like those trickster figures in folklore,
Right.
Like Loki in Norse mythology or Coyote in Native American stories. Always with the unreliable narratives messing with you.
So UFO occupants are like cosmic tricksters,
Yeah.
messing with us for kicks.
Could be. But it also brings up the question of their intention. Are they trying to teach us something with those weird messages? Or are they just messing with us?
Right. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, science fiction. UFO narratives, especially after those flying saucers took hold, they're totally shaped by sci-fi.
Of course, and Meheust acknowledges that. Science fiction gives us a framework, a language for the unexplainable.
Yeah, like Herbert Schirmer. Under hypnosis, he described the UFO recharging itself from power lines.
Sounds like a movie.
Totally. So it's hard to separate. Are witnesses just projecting familiar stories onto their experiences? Or is it something truly new?
Fact versus fiction, reality versus imagination. That line gets blurry.
Yeah, maybe it's not one or the other, but how they interact. Maybe sci-fi is preparing us for the truly unknown.
Ooh, I like that.
My head's spinning a bit. Chickens, messages, sci-fi. What else did Meheust find?
Well, there were a lot of cases where UFO occupants demanded very specific things from witnesses. But the demands made no sense.
Like what?
One case, a Belgian farmer, 3 UFO occupants show up. Insist on taking 1 mushroom from his farm. Just 1. Then they leave.
1 mushroom. Why? What could they possibly want with that?
Exactly. That lack of purpose, it's so strange, makes it compelling.
It's like those weird deals the devil makes in folklore.
Yeah.
Totally illogical, but somehow important.
Right. And we see this a lot with UFO stories. These pointless demands, it's like they're disrupting our sense of order, throwing us off balance.
Testing our compliance, maybe? Seeing how we react to the absurd?
Interesting thought. Testing boundaries between the known and unknown.
Okay, ready for more weirdness? Meheust found cases where witnesses felt totally paralyzed during encounters. Frozen, unable to move or speak.
Oh yeah, like they're stuck in time. That reminds me of those folklore stories where people meet fairies or spirits and can't move.
Like an invisible force is holding them.
And we see it in accounts of demonic possession, too. It's like encountering the unknown, whatever it is, triggers this primal fear, makes you feel powerless.
So UFO encounters, demons, fairies, all the same thing.
Not necessarily, but they all share these common threads, themes that point to something deeper about us, about being human.
Like we're tapping into a collective unconscious, shared fears and fascinations that have been with us forever.
That's a great way to put it. These stories, old, new, they're about our relationship with the unknown, with those forces that shape our lives and reality.
Okay, now I need a breather. Gifts, paralysis, fear. It's like we're decoding a secret language that connects ancient times to now.
And that language, it's woven into storytelling. It's the language of myth and folklore, our way of making sense of the world.
What about those journeys to other worlds? Meheust mentions cases where witnesses are whisked away to strange places. Just imagination running wild, or something more.
Well, we see those journeys in otherworldly places in mythology and folklore too. They're often about initiation, a symbolic passage into something beyond normal experience.
Like Julio, the Spanish hunter. He claimed he was taken on a crazy trip through space. Meheust says under hypnosis, Julio described the feeling of intense acceleration, being crushed, even losing consciousness, like his mind was simulating space travel.
That's fascinating. He's drawing on those archetypal images of transcendence, otherworldly voyages, stuff that's been in stories forever. It's like his imagination was tapping into a shared human experience of going beyond what we know.
So even if those journeys are just in their minds, they still mean something. Like they represent a need to break free from reality.
Exactly. It speaks to our desire to explore, to push boundaries, to connect with something bigger than ourselves.
Wired for exploration, both physically and mentally. Always pushing our understanding, seeking new experiences, even if they scare us or change how we see things.
And that drive to transcend the ordinary, to connect with the unknown, that's what fuels our fascination with both folklore and UFOs. They both offer a glimpse into a realm where anything's possible.
But if UFO encounters are using those ancient patterns, does that mean they're not really alien in the way we think? Are we just projecting our own stuff onto the unknown?
That's the big question, right? Are UFOs just modern versions of our old fascinations or something totally different, something we can't even grasp yet?
Like trying to see through a fogged up window, you know? Maybe they're tapping into our deepest fears and desires, using the language of folklore to communicate in a way we can kind of understand.
It's a compelling theory. And it leads to another thing Meheust points out. UFO encounters, they often involve a change in consciousness, like shamanic rituals or mystical experiences, a shift in how you see things.
Like the Australian Aboriginals. They believe their medicine men get their power from encounters with spirits. The spirits perform operations on them, put sacred objects in their bodies.
Right, and those operations, they often involve pain and suffering, but it's seen as necessary, a trial that leads to greater knowledge and power.
So UFO abductions with those weird medical procedures, those are like initiations, symbolic transformations.
It's possible, isn't it? And when you look at it through the lens of folklore, you see that pain and transformation all over the place in tons of cultures.
Like we're seeking out those transformative experiences, even if they're scary. They give us a taste of something beyond the ordinary.
Exactly. And that drive to go beyond the mundane, to connect with the unknown, it fuels our fascination with both folklore and UFOs. They both show us a world where anything's possible.
This deep dive has been incredible. It's like we peeled back reality and found a whole other dimension of meaning, a connection between UFOs and folklore I never would have seen before.
That's the power of making those connections, exploring the human experience. It opens up new ways of seeing the world, how we fit into the cosmos.
It's like we've got a new lens to view reality, one that shows us the links between ancient and modern, the ordinary and the extraordinary.
We're drawn to them, aren't we? Those stories, whether they're whispered around a campfire or splashed all over the news, those glimpses into the unknown, they kind of scare us, but we can't look away.
It makes you think. Those stories, the ancient myths, the UFO documentaries, they all give us a sense of connection to something bigger, like they're opening a door to a world beyond our own. But where does Meheust land on all this? Does he say UFOs are real or not?
That's the cool thing about his work. He doesn't give easy answers. He doesn't take sides. He's more interested in exploring those connections, the patterns, the echoes between UFO encounters and folklore.
So he's not trying to prove or disprove UFOs. He's more interested in what these stories, whether they're ancient or modern, what they tell us about us, our beliefs, fears, how we deal with the unknown.
Exactly. He's looking at the bigger picture. What do these stories tell us about being human?
It's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the debate, the need for truth. But maybe the real question is, why are we so drawn to these stories in the first place? Why do they resonate with us so much across different cultures, different times?
Exactly. And by looking at that question, those cultural and psychological factors, we might understand not just UFOs and folklore, but ourselves better and our place in the universe.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. We found this whole other dimension of meaning, a connection between UFOs and folklore that I never saw before.
And that connection, it's the power of the human imagination, our need to find meaning in the face of mystery.
It's the language of myth, of folklore, the stories we tell to make sense of the world. So, for everyone listening, what can you take away from all this? What can you think about as you go about your day?
Whether you believe in UFOs or not, the stories we tell, how we interpret those encounters, they say something about us, about our desire to connect with something bigger, to understand the unknown, to find meaning in all the mystery.
I like that. And maybe, just maybe, the truth about UFOs isn't just the evidence of the sightings, but in the stories themselves, in the power of those stories to shape how we see reality.
We've gone from ancient myths to modern-day mysteries, and it's clear the human imagination, it's powerful. It creates stories that both scare us and fascinate us. And with that, we'll leave you to ponder the mysteries of the universe.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and who knows? Maybe you'll have your own encounter with the unexplained.